Welcome to the Women's March Canada podcast, making the equality of women in Canada the new norm. This is episode 41, entitled In the Canadian Lens. My name is Leanne Castellino, and I'm your host, inspiring, uniting, and leading the charge for the advancement of women across Canada. Please welcome our guest this week, Federica Foglia. Federica is an independent filmmaker and director. She immigrated to Canada from Italy in 2012. In 2016, she had one of her films entitled Exit Entrance debut at the Toronto International Film Festival in the Shortcuts program. Federica, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Tell us first of all about the impetus and the inspiration for Exit Entrance.
Yeah, so that comes exactly from what you said. My experience as an immigrant to Canada, I moved here 6 years ago, and the short film was a coping mechanism for me to deal with all the feelings that come with immigration. So the displacement, the desire to belong, the nostalgia, the loneliness. It was my therapy, if you want to call it that. Yeah.
What were the expectations that you had coming to this country from Naples, Italy, versus what you experienced?
Yeah, it was a very different feel when I landed here. Starting from the very first moment when I landed, the country and the town felt very quiet, and I was imagining it to be like this big buzzing metropolis like New York, and instead Pearson Airport, it was 3 p.m., there was nobody around, and okay, this is not like really what I felt it would be. Anyway, I came to the town and I was driving through Queen West, and even the building didn't feel like what I had envisioned. So structurally, the design of the town was very different from my idea. And also before you leave from Italy, you go on this website, the Canadian immigration website, and you see a lot of different pictures, and you are sold on an idea that doesn't really reflect the reality of what it is here. So no matter how prepared you are, you're gonna find yourself clashing with reality.
That's interesting. How would you describe what you are sold versus?
Well, it's you are sold like the slogan, "You belong here," and Canada wants you, and Canada is amazing. We're a diverse country. We welcome everybody. But then when you get here, you realize that the structures and the government and all the bodies that are supposed to be there to support the immigrant are not really there as they should. And you're kind of left alone with yourself and a lot of question marks and a very lengthy process. Like when I moved here, it was the Rob Ford, Stephen Harper era. And that was a nightmare, to be honest with you. And the immigration process was very lengthy and very hard. And even speaking to the people over the phone that were representative of the immigration office was very hard. And sometimes they were dismissive because of my accent. So they say they couldn't understand me. And to be honest with you, with the switch of government, so in this new era, it got better. Now, when I call these people, they are more understanding. This is true experience. And now I'm just afraid that we're going to slide into another Ford era, and I'm not ready for it. I don't know where you all are watching from, but we are in Toronto, and Ontario has had this election now, and it's very worrisome for me.
That's interesting. When you talk about that immigration experience, you say that the system fails to assimilate women immigrants with dignity. That's something that you believe. Why?
Okay, how much time you have? Because we can go on and on. So the immigration process itself, it's a very disruptive one. So the structures that are in place are very shallow ones, and are structures that are gonna support you in a very bureaucratic way and with limited support. What women would need in these situations is a more throughout support. So you apply for your visa, maybe you have to wait 2 years before you get it. Who's gonna be holding your hands during these 2 years? because of course the bureaucracy is not going to have time for all of us. So there should be some sort of programs maybe that matches women, Canadian women, with Canadian women immigrant, to be kind of helping them integrate. And maybe these women volunteers from Canada get some sort of benefits on their hand, aside from the benefit of confronting with a different culture. So you have, as an immigrant woman, you deal with a lot of loneliness and sense of feeling kind of left out from the society, on the margins. And people tend to not understand that. They say, why are you complaining? You know, you're in Canada, it's a great country, you have a job, and what are you missing? But a woman's life and a man's life and a human person's life is much more than having a job and having the bureaucracy that assists you a little, along the way.
It's so interesting to me because did you expect, as a cinematographer and filmmaker, to make 4 films on this subject?
No. Not at all. Not in a million years. I was not an immigrant before coming here. I was living in Italy. So my idea of filmmaking was very much aligned with the idea of Italian filmmaking. So fiction films or neorealism and films that are completely on different subject matter. But then when I started making my films, I said to myself, what are my films going to be about? I have to really dig inside me and see what's the subject I want to deal with. And I feel that, like me, there's many people that are not represented in the film industry or in cinema or when you go watch a movie. And there's a lot of cliches around immigration. So even in advertising, there's things that are like just making you have goosebumps because they're completely far from the reality. So my hope is that I fill that gap with my films.
So 4 films, 4 short films, each on the subject of immigration. Clearly, your experience has shaped so many aspects of your life. Your coming to Canada has shaped so much of your life and your profession. Are there specific examples that come to mind that really struck you and really surprised you that you experienced as a new immigrant to this country?
Well, yeah. Despite being here for 6 years, I thought I was done with the stress of immigration. So I'm like, okay, 6 years ago, I moved here, I got my visa, now I'm kind of starting to ease into Canada, and I'm great, fantastic. Things are working out. And then when I least expected it, I got a very brutal reality check a couple of months ago. With an episode of very harsh racism while I was riding a TTC streetcar in Toronto. I got on the streetcar on King Street and there was no seat, and there was just one seat at the back of the streetcar. And there was a girl like me, 30 years old, white girl, and not that it matters, but just to tell you. And she had an empty seat next to her and she had a small grocery bag on it. So I started asking her, can you please take the bag away so I can see it? Because because we are talking to women, I had my period, I was in so much pain, I really needed to sit. Mm-hmm. And I was going a long distance. Plus, it's my right to sit on the streetcar. So she would completely ignore me. She had headphones and I'm like, okay, can you please move your bag? So she continued to ignore me. I then decided to sit on the empty space that was left on the seat. So I didn't talk to her anymore. And I just put myself, on a side. And she bursted into screaming and she was like, what are you doing? You don't do this. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm trying to tell you that I want to sit and you're not listening to me. Well, you don't do this in my country. Go back to your country. You are not allowed here. These true words. And I was firstly shocked and my heart was racing. And I said to her, I'm sorry, but I get the ticket and it's my right to sit. No, it's not your right. This is not your country. Go back to your country. So that was the biggest shock of my Canadian life for several reasons. First of all, because I'm a white person. So I'm not a visible minority, and I'm not prepared to deal with racism through the course of my life, because we have the assumption that we would not be, accused with racism or like sent away because we're white. So we kind of visibly integrate here. So that made me understand what people of color and visible minorities go through on a regular basis. So I was like, oh my God, this is what people that are visible minorities go through regularly. And it's awful. And then the second thing that was surprising for me was that nobody around me in a packed streetcar did anything to intervene. So that for me was worse than having the girl behave that way. So I didn't know what to do. When she said, go back to your country, I started crying. I went to the TTC driver and I asked him, what do I have to do in a situation like this? Like, this person is racially harassing me. What does one do? So I didn't really know what to do. And he called the supervisor, and they said, you can't really call the police because she hasn't attacked you physically. So I wanted to report this, but I couldn't, and I was in a rush to go on an interview, so I let it go. And then a couple of hours later, I started calling the police because I wanted to report the incident somehow and understand, because I'm an immigrant here. I don't know the rules. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So I wanted to understand, what can I do in cases like this? And the police said, actually, you cannot do anything because there's freedom of speech. And I was really shocked because in Italy, we have freedom of speech as well. But in several cases, you can go to jail or pay a fine if you say certain things. So that was like the most surprising thing that happened to me in Canada as an immigrant. And I thought I've seen them all. So just to tie this with the recent election of Doug Ford, I wasn't surprised at all that he won and the Conservative Party is rising, because this is the actual situation in the streets. Like, we have to be really careful because we are heading into a very conservative and Trump-like Canada, and it's going to be very bad. Like, we still are in time to fix it.
That is a very powerful story of what you endured, and sort of now looking at that experience through yet another lens, right? So what you just said about looking at it through visible minorities and what they go through potentially on a daily or regular basis. How are your films, in your opinion, how do you think they are increasing the dialogue on this subject matter?
Well, yeah, actually, it surprised me that as well, because when I first made my films, I thought it wouldn't matter to many people. It was just like a personal experience. But then when I started doing film screenings and Q&As, and I started showing my films to the city council, for example, there were a ton of people relating with the same. So they were identifying with what I was going through, and it was very uplifting. It was a moment for me to feel less alone, but also a moment for them to feel represented on screen. So, for example, a documentary that I made in a refugee camp was used by the city council to discuss further politics in the region and in Ontario for immigration and refugees. So, I'm following my passion and my heart, but at the same time, I'm really hoping it can start a dialogue and make people feel represented.
Do you feel that experience that you shared with us, that you went through recently, could potentially be the inspiration for another film?
Totally. I have already scripted in my first feature film that I'm writing now, because it is something that you don't believe it's true, but it is true. Like, it could totally be a scripted scene. One of those, crazy racist scene that you see on TV in a movie. Well, this is reality and it happened for real. So of course I'm going to use it. I'm going to use all of my experience as best as I can.
So what would you say to women watching or listening to this interview? What would you want them to take away from what you're doing, your experiences? Some of them will be immigrants, others will not. What do you want them to take away?
Well, I want them to take away the fact that no matter how distressed you are, you always have to speak up. No matter if you are alone and everybody is telling you things that are different from what you feel, always speak up in a reasonable way, in a decent way, and make your voice heard. Don't succumb to the system, because the system is going always to try to suppress individual voices. Because especially in Canada, there is a system that wants a lot of parity between everyone and everybody has to conform. But a lot of us don't conform because it is what human nature is. Like, we're all outside boxes and we shouldn't be put in a little, label to belong. So whenever you feel that everybody else is talking and you don't identify, raise your hand and say, I'm sorry, I don't identify with this. This is my point of view. What can we do to find a common ground?
It's interesting because a lot of people listening to this will say, absolutely, speaking up is very important. The challenge, though, for a lot of people, and you have an outlet as a filmmaker. That's your craft, that's your passion, that's your outlet. But a lot of people will say, I don't have that, and who do I speak up to? Because part of the challenge is finding the person that's going to listen to you.
Yeah.
So what would you say to that?
Yeah, this is what I'm saying is to be considered, like to be taken in consideration in all aspects of life. I'm not just talking about me, I'm making a film, I want to speak up, I want to be heard. But these situations happen to me also when I'm grocery shopping, also when I'm on the streetcar, as you said, or when I'm in a conference and everybody's talking about how to get funds and everybody's saying, oh, you should do this and that, and then I don't identify. So I have to raise my hand in the moment. Like, I don't have to go home and be resentful and wait to find an outlet. I have to speak in the moment. And to do so, you have to have a lot of courage, because you are most likely to be alone in that position. But if you feel inside you that what you are about to say is true, and it's true for you, and it's meaningful, no matter where you are, you can be really, as I said, in a grocery shop and you do it. Or you use the internet, because the internet can be the new land for you where you can put all your thoughts out. So start a blog, go on Twitter, go on Facebook, share it with people, share it in a respectful way too, because everybody has different opinions. So I see a lot of resentment between men and women now, or like that. It's not useful. It's not going to work. We have to find a common ground. So reasonability and kindness, and always speak up your mind and find whatever outlet you can, or build one for yourself. You have to be like a weed that doesn't go away. Like, they don't want you to grow out on the lawn and they cut you and then you climb on top of another fence from the neighbor. So you have to be like, invasive but still respectful.
Federica Foglia, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thanks for listening.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in to listen. Your comments are always welcome and encouraged. Please subscribe to the Women's March Canada channel and receive updates every time we upload a new podcast. Our mission across Canada is to stand together in solidarity with our partners and families for the protection of our children, our rights, our health, and our families, recognizing that our vibrant and diverse communities are the strength of our country. This is the Women's March Canada podcast. My name is Leanne Castellino. Please follow us on Twitter at Women's March CDA, or our website, womensmarchcanada.com. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great day.